So obviously you guys, this is a little pre-show stuff just to kill time and just to have fun with you guys. Obviously y'all all know Kelsey Lewin, you probably subscribe to her channel. I've started a YouTube show recently, and I don't know if any of you guys have watched the show. I've talked to a couple of you guys, but it's Tales from a Retro Gamer, and if you just look up on YouTube, Brett Weiss, Brettwiss, that's where you can find my show. Indeed, but I don't have like a snarky YouTube name or something. No, you're cool. I actually I started YouTube about 3 years ago, just sort of goofing around with it and not really knowing what to do with it. And I started a podcast with a guy, and he passed away, unfortunately, so that was about 2.5 years ago. And so in the time since, I was bitter. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't even hardly look at YouTube, because we were YouTubers and, for a short time, and then he passed away. But finally, I decided, okay, I need to get back to this. I really need to do this for, it helps bring notice to the books. It's fun, and I have a lot of stories to tell. And so that's what I've been doing just for a couple of months now. And I'm really trying to get to 1,000 subscribers at this show, because when I hit my 1,000th sub, I'm going to tell the worst gaming thing that has ever happened to me. I've only been really serious about YouTube for about 2 months. And so I've gone from 100 subscribers to about almost 1,000 within about a month and a half. So it seems to be growing pretty quickly, but it'll take a while till I hit 100,000, like certain people I know. But yeah, so anyway, I appreciate that. Just doing a little pre-show fun.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, just kind of.
We got a sellout crowd here.
Yeah.
I don't know who you told them you were paneling with, but.
Well, it's early yet. There'll have some, and if this were a small room, it would look very crowded.
I know.
Yeah,
I know.
This is
the
enormous
biggest room
room
I've ever been given. So
oh, right.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, because we've always had the panel rooms downstairs. So.
Hey, congrats on getting married.
Thank you.
I love that video with the auction.
Oh, that was such a fun thing to witness. It was so exciting. He's sitting there bidding up that, they had
that wasn't fun.
You're like, what's he doing? If anybody hasn't seen
after I hit like the 2,000 mark, I was like, okay, what's happening?
Did you get suspicious at that point?
Yeah.
Or did you, you say something's up?
Cody's an idiot, but he's not that much of an idiot.
Right, so if anybody hasn't seen it at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo last year, Kelsey's now husband, Cody, proposed to her in a very unique way by bidding an astronomical amount of money on a mystery box, and that mystery box contained her engagement ring.
Yeah. Have you guys done the auction here at PRGE yet? If you haven't,
it is so much fun.
So good.
Even if you don't want to buy anything,
yeah.
It's just super fun to see.
There's a bar you can now drink while you're bidding on.
Oh, nice, and that'll probably make you bid more if you're.
It absolutely does.
Yeah. But it's just fun to see what everything goes for. Yeah, he got drunk and proposed to you. That's higher, but I just bought this $10 Right. Well, it's like, they should just bring you free drinks like in Vegas, so you'll just bid like crazy.
Yeah, and then the price of admission triples.
Yeah.
Right, so speaking of Vegas, I've got a future episode of Tales from Retro Gamer. I'm going to tell how I gamble for free in Las Vegas at WinStar and all these different casinos. And it relates to how I used to play arcade games for free back in the early 80s. Since I didn't hardly have any money, I figured out a way to, and I've got an episode about that where I would, search the coin slots, push the little button to get quarters out. I would be standing behind people that were playing pinball, and when they would walk away from the machine, they were a noob or a parent or a little kid or something, they didn't know about matching. And so I would have a 10% chance of getting a free game by standing behind them. I would spend hours at the arcade, and occasionally it would match, and I would have a free game of pinball. Well, I've been doing something similar at gambling casinos, and so a lot of people leave, this is a little preview of a future episode, a lot of people leave credits behind on these machines. They'll leave 23 cents here, 3 cents there. Every once in a while you'll see a buck or two. And I just go just to kill, my wife and kid, they love to hit the slots and do all that stuff. It's not really my thing, but I figured out a way just to kill some time and have like a treasure hunt. I'll go from machine to machine, look for credits, print out that ticket, and then I'll go to another machine, if it's got a quarter on it or whatever, put in the ticket, do it out, and it takes me about an hour to get about $7 or $8. But it kills time, and it reminds me of being a kid in the arcades when I didn't have any money, and it's just kind of something fun to do. It's a little treasure hunt, and I'm going to do an episode about that. It's, you know, that's...
You're always a winner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Texas, that's minimum wage, too.
Yeah, right, $7.25, that's right. Yeah, we've got our redneck minimum wage. But anyway, it's, you know, something to do while they're out, they're, you know, playing blackjack and whatnot. So anyway, but it's that kind of stuff. On the show, I talk about just gaming back then, you know, and how different it was today, you know, like going to Toys R Us and pulling the tickets off the wall. So you could go to that magical room at the front with to me it was kind of reminded me of Scrooge McDuck, where you open this door and instead of just, you know, piles of gold coins, there's all these video games. And, you know, Toys R Us didn't have the games out on the shelf just to pluck off the shelf. There was no like security tags or any of that. It was just tickets and you took them up to the front. And that was kind of nostalgic to me, that way of buying video games. And, but that kind of stuff, yeah. So that's what my channel's about. Just, when I was trying to figure out what to do with YouTube, I wanted to separate myself from, you know, all the reviewers, and I don't really have the production time or facilities to do like these real in-depth histories that are going to take, you know, like you do, like you said, you spend 80 hours sometimes on researching one video.
I don't have the time either, I just do
right.
it anyway.
Yeah, do it when you can. Yeah, but anyway, it's fun. So I'll every Tuesday at 10 a.m. I'll have a new episode, and my son is gracious enough to record my videos and edit and everything. So it's really it's fun. It's a nice hobby, and hopefully it'll, you know, I'll do it for as long as it's fun.
It's the right way to do it.
All right, so
Getting
it
started
is 10:58. I believe we can start. Thank you guys so much for coming out here. Did anybody come from a long way away? Like, are most of you guys local? Anybody from, you know, out of state or country? Very cool. Really appreciate you guys making the effort to come out. My name is Brett Weiss, and I have been doing this for longer than I almost care to admit, which sort of reveals my age. I've been gaming since 1975. I remember my parents taking me to the arcades, more to like bowling alleys and skating rinks and stuff, and I discovered Pong and Midway's Gunfight, which is just two little stick figures coming out onto the screen, you know, shooting each other, sort of a precursor to like Mortal Kombat and Halo and all that kind of thing. But back then, it was super exciting. Played the electromechanical machines in the arcades. And then that led to, in 1997, I started writing professionally about video games for the All Game Guide. And then when I stopped doing that, it sort of led to the books that I've been writing. And so I've been at this for a very long time, and I thought it would be interesting to do a panel with someone half my age who is also into video game history, and just because she has a different perspective. And this is Kelsey Lewin, which most of you guys know. She is very accomplished. She's a co-owner of Pink Gorilla Video Games in Seattle, the Seattle area. 2 stores, right?
Have any of you guys been there? I know it's, yeah.
Pink Gorilla. I would love to
Yeah.
make the trek up there sometime. And she works with the Video Game History Foundation, and she's a very popular YouTuber, and she's recently hit over 100,000 subscribers, which is awesome, very impressive, and it's gone up a lot from there. I mean, you're already at like 110 or 115 or something, I think.
I believe you.
Yeah. So when you hit 100,000, what was that like? Did it stand out to you? You got like YouTube sent you like a plaque and stuff?
Yeah, you know, I mean, it was, well, first of all, the plaque thing, I think they're probably hoping that you don't ask for that anymore, because I didn't get any sort of like, you know, here's how you get your plaque or anything like that. I had to go through customer support and be like, hey, I hit that milestone you guys talk about. When do I get a thing for
well,
that?
YouTube has changed so much recently with the algorithms, and they're being more stingy. They're not letting you monetize until you have a certain amount of subscribers and views and all that.
Yeah.
So it's changing.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I don't know exactly how many 100K subscriber channels there are, but I mean, I'm in like the top 100,000 YouTube channels.
Wow.
There's 99,000-ish people bigger than me.
It's crazy how much gaming content is on YouTube, and it's really hard to stand out, and that's one reason I tried to do something completely different, you know, with the stories of the 70s and 80s instead of, And so congratulations, that's an awesome
thanks, yeah.
accomplishment. And so, yeah, right.
I don't even know how to do the wacky editing. That takes too much time.
Well, speaking of wacky, I've noticed you don't have a wacky YouTube name. You're not the Kelsinator. You're not, you've got a cartridge named after you, Kelsbert, like Hubert. So you don't go by any snarky YouTube names. Can you tell me basically why did you just?
Yeah, so when I got into, I kind of fell into YouTube. It was because I was talking about video games, and that, basically I was just talking about games and kind of caught the attention of Jason, Metal Jesus. It was like, hey, you seem to know what you're talking about, could use a new voice on my channel. And I was like, sure, I could talk about whatever. And I think the first video we did was about Pokemon, something that, I'm
That was your first game that you really latched onto.
It was, yeah. That was, the game I got for Christmas in '98. And
see, Pong and Pokemon, that really tells you the age difference.
But yeah, so YouTube was never the thing that I felt like I wanted to do, but I knew that I liked talking about history. I knew that I liked talking about games in general, but it wasn't necessarily to be a YouTuber. The first thing I thought I wanted to do was go be like a host. Like, you guys see when you go to GameStop, there's someone like talking about the games, or IGN people who are on the scene at E3 and talking about what they're seeing. So I did events and I did PR before all of that, and I was like, oh, I'm a fairly sociable person. That seems like something I could do. And I found out that's not what I want to do. But the reason I kept my name was because it's like, I'm trying to put myself forward, not like a persona, not like a, different version of myself. It's just me.
Right.
And it's a lot easier to search someone's name than it is to search, like, some people have very memorable ones that.
Does anybody have any recommendations for Kelsey on what her YouTube name might be? any funny nicknames? See, I do too.
I'm always keeping it. That's
right.
That's who I am. So.
I don't mean that seriously. I just thought so I sort of had the same view going into YouTube. I've thought about a couple of different things. The Retro Gamer, which is, I thought, okay, I'm 50 years old. I really don't need a goofy name like. Yeah, I don't really need to do that. And plus, as a lot of people pointed out to me, since you've been a writer for so long and since you've got all these books published, you really want to put your name on there.
Yeah, you already have a brand.
Yeah, I already have a brand, and just to, if people are curious about me and they already know me from my books, there you go. No need to trick it up beyond that. So recently, you've been working with the Video Game History Foundation for a while now. How long?
So the foundation was founded in February of 2017. I started bugging Frank in March. So I would say I've been involved in some capacity since like April of 2017.
And just recently you were promoted?
Yeah, so I'm the co-director now. That's sort of been in the works for a while, since about May, but I don't think it was announced until August or September. So basically 50% of the foundation, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. Our main mission is to make sure that historians have the tools they need to tell the story of video games. So someone like a writer would probably really benefit, and we can talk a little bit more about this, would probably really benefit from having access to kind of primary source materials, the original press releases.
Right.
How much easier would your job have been writing these books if you could look up a stack of all of the original press releases for all of these games?
Oh, absolutely.
You don't have to rely on Wikipedia, fact check. You get to see from the original sources, maybe the intention of the game, what they were going for.
Well, when I started writing my first book, Classic Home Video Games 1972 through 1984, back in 2006, it was a lot harder to find information about the games, especially the developers, and just, online manuals weren't as prevalent. It's a lot easier to find. If I have the games, or I borrow the games, or I emulate the games, you really need the original manual in some form, whether it's HTML or a scan or something. And it's a lot easier now to find information than it was. And moving forward with the History Foundation, it'll even get easier to find.
Yeah. So we work with media materials, we work with development materials. I know your books don't necessarily cover the development of the games, but when you're telling a story about a video game, it's really good to have that kind of information. You can learn a lot of new things about it that way. And I think that's something that, right now, you just kind of have to I mean, maybe someone scanned it and put it on the Internet Archive if someone's found it, but for most games, there's very little out there.
Right.
So that's what we're working to fix.
That's one. So when I made the transition from the classic home video game series to the SNES Omnibus, that was one of the reasons, because the books do have some development, like Steve Wojta and some others, one of the old Intellivision Blue Sky Rangers, several people that worked on games of this era do have some stories in there. So I wanted to include a little bit of that. And I want to plug a friend of mine's books called The Minds Behind the Games. I don't know if you've heard of these books. It's the beginning of a series, and every chapter is the complete history, the development history of games. And so I recommend that book series if you're looking for, lengthy developmental stories. Good stuff.
So when you start doing your books and you're looking for some of those people who worked on these games, how do you approach an interview like that? What are you looking to get from them to put in your book?
I'm really a big fan of the stories. I'll let other people cover like the technical aspect of it, just like the nuts and bolts of what went into programming the game. The mechanics of it don't really interest me because I'm not a mechanical person. I love the anecdotes, like, ordering pizza at midnight because you're working on a game around the clock. So had a nervous breakdown designing a game because, the company's pushed the deadlines, and the Christmas deadlines are so severe.
Isn't it sad that's all of the development stories? It's like your go-to development story is like, and they were sick, they were hungry, they were tired.
Well, conflict creates good stories, but there's happy stories too. Just like completing a game just in the nick of time, a game that sells surprisingly well. Serendipitous things that happened along the way. So there's positive stories too. But so I like the anecdotes, the stories behind the game.
How do you get those? I do this myself sometimes too when I'm doing my research. Tell me about how you kind of, as an interviewer, get those stories out of people. How do you? Because you can't just say, "Tell me a story."
Right.
They're not going to be able to dig in their brains.
Right. Well, I've written for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, which is a major metropolitan newspaper, for 11 years. And they've recently downscaled where they're not using freelancers nearly as much, so I'm not doing as much anymore. But I've been a journalist for a long time, and so I've done many, many interviews about a lot of things I find very uninteresting. So when I can interview someone about video games, which is something that's fun, it kind of comes naturally, just talking about a subject I'm passionate about. So I try to dig into just like, okay, so for example, Hubert, Warren Davis, he's working on a book about, just Hubert and working on that game. And he sent me just sort of some advanced text, wanted me to look at it and just give him some ideas, what I thought. And he had a lot of good information about the game itself. And I said, I want to know what you were doing then. Because he would he would say, well, I got married, but he wouldn't name her.
Right.
Or I did this and I did this, and he would sort of skip past some of the human element.
So it's a lot of trying to get people to elaborate on the
human
thing
elements,
and pay attention to that. And I have to do this too when I'm interviewing. The people will sometimes gloss over something like,
because
and then I had to run to the airport at 2 a.m. I'm like, well, wait, why did you have to do that?
Right, because these books, so he's going to write a book about Hubert and the development. Now, gamers will pick it up, but you want to reach beyond gamers. You want to reach the casual gamer or the non-gamer. You want that human element in the story, whether it's an article, a book, or anything, unless it's just some technical data thing.
Sure.
If you're doing a book with color and with history and with developmental, anything like that, you want the human element along with the mechanics of the creation of the game. People like stories, they like heart, they like people they can relate to, aside just from the dry facts. So speaking of stories, now if you don't mind, Kelsey did write a story for the SNES Omnibus Volume 2, and if you guys can indulge us for a moment, would you mind reading your story out of that book?
Yeah, sure.
So,
you have it open?
Yeah, I've got it. I just so happen to have it marked in that place. So she was kind enough to write a story about Packy and Marlin, which is a pretty obscure Super Nintendo game.
Yeah, you gave me that list, and this was my immediate answer for this, which maybe is weird.
Because you're really fascinated by unusual, unique, and interesting games,
Yeah.
oddball and quirky stuff. And this is the genesis of how you started getting interested in that kind of stuff.
All right, so I will read this to you. I'm not going to do voices though, because there's quotes in this. So, Kelsey, you have to check out this game. I was still training at my new job at a little retro video game store in Seattle called Pink Gorilla Games. My boss, a longtime game collector, held up a Super Nintendo cartridge that appeared to feature 2 fully clothed elephants grinning. It's a game about diabetes. I've never seen such a weird concept in my life. Elephants with diabetes, I was fascinated. Looking back, Packy and Marlon is not all that crazy. At its core, it's an okay platformer that forces you to learn as you play. You have to eat healthy and give yourself insulin shots to control your blood glucose levels or else repeat the level. It's just one of the many edutainment titles produced in the mid-90s, and believe it or not even the only diabetes-based game on the Super Nintendo. For all the ridiculous entertainment games seem to get, Packy and Marlon is not a bad game. It's not insultingly juvenile like its predecessor, Captain Novolin, and while diabetes is clearly the focus of the game, it's not so heavy-handed that I could not enjoy it. No one in my family is diabetic. I have little use for the diabetes education I accidentally got playing this game, but it inspired something weird in me. I played Packy and Marlon in 2012, and since then my game collection has morphed into a celebration of oddball, obscure games, and hardware. Among the handy sonar fishing attachment for the Wonder Swan, I have the Game Boy One in the museum downstairs, by the way. The obsolete Famicom modem, the enormous Super Nintendo Lifecycle 3500 stationary bike, and appropriately right next to the Bayer Digit blood glucose monitor for Nintendo DS, there still sits a copy of Packy and Marlon, a testament to the kind of weird pieces of gaming history that I love. So this game literally is I think anything could have inspired it, but that is the game that inspired me to
started you on your road to hunting out the really strange and unusual. She's got a great video on the Exertainment life cycle for the Super Nintendo, and last year's Portland Retro Gaming Expo, you bid on that life cycle.
2 years ago.
2 years ago,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, that was...
I didn't get engaged and get a Super Nintendo.
Oh, yeah.
That's too many.
That's right, that was 2 years ago.
That's too many cool things.
Yeah, you can't do that all at once.
Yeah, I didn't buy anything last year.
Not a thing? No pickups video?
Well, I didn't buy anything at the auction.
Oh, okay, yeah. But like I said, it's still fun to go to even when you don't buy anything.
Yeah, it's great. It's the most fun time. You ever want to be in a room full of drunk nerds getting excited over signs and sometimes there's development material. 2 years ago there was the source code for Yar's Revenge was in the auction.
Yeah, people were nerding out over just printed pieces of paper because it's...
Everyone cheered when the auction got over $2,600.
$2,600,
so
right.
It was anyone have $2,600? A couple people raised their hand and then the whole room went crazy. It was great. It's so much fun.
No doubt. So if you, speaking of your YouTube and all that, what are some challenges you've had with your channel beyond just time?
I think the biggest issue I have, and it's not that much of an issue, it's really just when I do, my best videos, my best work is probably still the Gluco Boy video, which is blood glucose monitor for the Game Boy Advance. I put an insane amount of work into that. I have hours and hours of interviews I did with both Paul Wessel, the guy who invented it, and then Brad Butler, who is the lead designer on it. And you know who cares? No one. No one cares. So it is still my least watched video on my channel.
It's just such an obscure,
definitely my
interesting
best
topic.
one. It's the best information. I saved the game. That ROM was not out there until me. There's
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's not the full ROM because no one's found a copy of Gluco Boy except for the one that's in a glass case at the Bayer offices. But I have a development one. So it's, it was a big deal. So my biggest challenge is just getting people to care about the same kind of weird stuff I do. But honestly, in general, I've been surprised by how much people do care.
Yeah.
I didn't think that people were going to start watching my stuff and caring about the research I did. And even if, it's 32,000 people that saw that one as opposed to 80,000 or whatever, that's still 32,000 people that
That's a lot of views.
Got to learn about the Gluco Boy, and that's probably more than I ever expected
Gluco
to
Boy,
get.
that's such a...
It's so good, right?
Maybe that could be your new YouTube name.
No, it's trademarked.
Gluco Girl.
You can.
You could be Gluco Girl. Oh,
I hope
absolutely.
so. Yeah. Well, Gaming Historian just did a video on it.
Yeah.
I saw something on your channel where somebody had the exercycle hooked up to something in a cabinet. It was like a Super Nintendo with a Super Game Boy.
Yeah.
And the Game Boy Sonar. Was that on your channel?
Oh, with the Game Boy Sonar?
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's not me.
It was a link from your channel. It was really weird.
Huh.
I didn't get all the way through it.
So my biggest struggle with YouTube was, as I've mentioned before the panel started, so about 3 years ago, I decided I need to do something with YouTube because that was obviously the way things were going. You know, if I had published these books in the, in the 90s or something, they would sell so much better because there was so little like it and there was so much less information online. But, with popular YouTubers writing books and things, and I just thought I need some kind of YouTube presence that would just help visibility, it would be fun. And so I had started a channel with a guy named Curtis Newton. And he ran a global PlayStation website where it was just this global gaming network called Hold Square. Like the controller, you hold the square down, it was Hold Square. And so we got to talking, he was a friend of mine for a while. And he could, supply the modern slant and talk about new games and new releases, and I could bring a retro, view, and we would talk about pop culture, just a talking head podcast where we just cover pop culture, current events, gaming, comics, movies, and all that kind of stuff. It was a blast. Well, unfortunately, a few episodes in, he starts having headaches. He starts missing episodes and say, hey, let's record next week. And I was like, okay. I thought he was just kind of getting burnt out real quick, and like a lot of people do. You'll notice a lot of people have a few episodes and then they go away, and I understand it because it takes time and effort and energy. And he started missing some episodes, and then he would miss 2 in a row, and he would miss work, and he just wasn't feeling well. And so he went to the doctor, and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And then it all culminated that we went to a Star Trek convention together. Said, oh, this will be a great episode. This is going to be fun. William Shatner was about to hit the stage for his big talk, and we were there. And this guy was a huge Star Trek fan. And he says, I've got to go. I'm not feeling well. And I knew it was serious. If you're going to miss William Shatner when you're a major Trekkie, Trekker, whatever you want to call it, something's wrong. And so he left. And and then not long after that, he fell at work and hit his head. Then about a month after that, my wife and I were on the way to Frisco, Texas, which is where the National Video Game Museum is. We were going to a press junket at a place called Nerdvana, and that's where Randy Pitchford was going to be, and they were doing a big grand opening. That's his wife's restaurant. Guy's Gearbox owner, Randy Pitchford, his wife's restaurant, Nerdvana. We were headed there. Penn from Penn and Teller is going to be there. We were super excited. 10 minutes away from the restaurant, we get a phone call from Curtis's good friend that he had passed away, and we were just we were in shock. Here's a good friend of mine, a good friend of my wife's, my kids really liked him, and we were just in total shock. So what do? We're on the way to this event. We're supposed to be there because I'm covering it. I write for newspapers and magazines and everything. We're supposed to be there. So we thought, Curtis would be really pissed if we missed this on his behalf. We had kind of a dark sense of humor with each other, and I thought, we're going to go. And so that might have been part of shock. We didn't know what to do. So we just went to this event, and I was such in shock that I texted my kids that he had died, and they're like, you texted me about a good family friend dying? But we were in shock. You don't think rationally necessarily when something like that happens. Anyway, so we endured the event and did, he had a Star Wars funeral because he liked Star Wars even more than Star Trek. So as they carried his casket, everybody had their lightsabers out in a row. It was super nerdy, and Curtis would have appreciated it. And so anyway, after that, I didn't go through the normal steps they say you're supposed to go through, the grieving process. I was just angry for a long time. And then that lasted for a couple of years, and I thought, okay, I'm over the anger. Now I just have this base sense of sadness. I'm going to do something with YouTube. But I didn't know what, and so I'm a big horror fan, so Tales from the Crypt and all that stuff. I sort of put that together with my gaming history. I thought, what separates me from most YouTubers? Well, I'm older than most of them. And so I thought I can tell, stories of my past. And so that's what I've been doing, and my son has been gracious enough to film and edit my videos. He's a whiz with iMovie and whatever. I don't even understand any of that stuff. I'm a storyteller. I write fiction. I write, about games, and the mechanical stuff and all that, not so much. And so that's the genesis of the Tales from a Retro Gamer show. And so anyway, not as glamorous as meeting Metal Jesus and starting a channel, but that was my origin with the show. So at this panel, what we're going to do to, sorry to bring everybody down, but what we're going to do, we're going to give away a copy of the SNES Omnibus Volume 2. If you already have that book, you can have this book or this book. And we're also going to give away a couple of items to the runners-up.
I've got some Video Game
Couple of
History
these
Foundation
items.
merch.
Yeah,
you
so-
can also buy it down in the museum, but...
Unless you have any
It's
more
for charity.
questions, or,
I do have a question for you.
Yeah.
So you've been writing for a long time.
yes.
What advice do you have for someone who wants to get into video game writing?
It's so hard to know. I was just talking to Chris Kohler, the editor for Kotaku, and he says it just gets more and more difficult. I mean, just as the markets shrink and shrink and shrink, really online is you just type in video game writing markets, and you will find some things. Just it's tough. It is really difficult to, just a few short years ago. There's probably 50 magazines I've written for that have gone under. Not just gaming, but just different magazines that I used to write for that are no longer. You really writing online is that's about it now.
Well, and writing books.
Yeah, you can write books. And
here's something that I have a problem with. There's not enough video game books out there. Have you guys ever seen the gaming section at like a Barnes & Noble? It's like literally just Fortnite and Minecraft books. They're not like books. Yeah, if you're lucky, you get the Hyrule Historia. Like you might get, Console Wars or,
Right.
I've never seen Phoenix in a Barnes &
now,
Noble.
self-published books, generally Barnes & Noble will kind of stay away from self-published stuff. So,
So I think there needs to be, there's a huge music section at Barnes & Noble, for, books about
huge
music.
sports section.
Yeah, and video games, there's no reason why the biggest entertainment industry doesn't have a giant section. So more people should be writing books. And, maybe you self-publish, but you could pitch those things to a publisher.
If you go to the Strand in New York or some of these big independent stores, you'll see a pretty decent-sized video game
Powell's
selection.
here.
Yeah.
Powell's has
Powell's,
a very good video game
The
selection.
City of
They got-
Books is so freaking awesome.
They got all the boss fight books, which
Yeah.
is an excellent series of books. They're all about individual games, so each person, does a ton of research and analysis on a specific game, and writes, the thing that they're an expert on, and it's all part of one big series. So
Right.
I think, in general, I'm not saying that being, I don't know.
Well,
I
there are-
assume being a book writer is not hasn't made you a millionaire yet.
Well, I
But-
make more money as a journalist and just writing for magazines and articles, and more frequently, these websites that will just do constant, they'll update 2 or 3 times a day on Facebook and everywhere, links to their content. So I'm doing a lot, whereas I used to would make $400 for writing a magazine article, a newspaper article, I'm now making $150 for an online article. So it's different, and it's a struggle, but it's still fun, and I'm supplementing my income with other things. Like I walk dogs for WAG, which is a lot of fun. So after after I've been writing for 3 or 4 hours, you just come to a stop. You're just done.
That's
Because,
actually really good, because then you get some exercise.
yeah,
and-
by the time it's 2 or 3 in the afternoon, I am ready to get outside, and I love dogs. Huge, I absolutely love dogs. But yeah, it's a struggle. I would just, getting back to what you were asking, just look up writers markets, online. That's the best way to do it. Kotaku actually publishes, freelance work, and they pay $150 for an article. So that's one good outlet. But there's others like that. Crack.com does some video game articles, and that's where it's gone to, these websites that just constantly push content, and they'll pay you anywhere from $50 to about $150. That's really where a lot of it's at. And if you happen to be, super famous, like a YouTuber or something, it's a good way to promote your books, and so that helps. But book sales have been very steady for many years now. And it's funny, some people say there are too many video game books just because it's actually a subgenre now, whereas before, when my first book came out in 2000.
Where are all the too many
I know.
video game books?
Well, just because there are some now, they're saying there are too many, but there are so many fields uncovered. There are systems that don't have complete guides. There are legendary programmers that don't have biographies. There's a huge untapped. Yeah, there's a lot. There,
You know what I mean?
there are.
What I appreciate about your books is the comprehensive. You got every game for the Super NES in those books.
Thank you.
That's amazing.
Thank you very much. It's quite an undertaking, but it's always fun. And I always say, anytime I finish a book, I tell my wife, this is my last book, and she just laughs at me. So I might take a month or two off, and I get that itch again to start, my OCD gaming books. Oh, okay. Any announcements? No. Yeah. Do you have any writing plans in the future? Are you going to write a book someday?
Yeah, I would love to.
Yeah.
I love putting together research and then writing the script is my favorite part.
Well, you're a very talented historian, and just from some of the writing, I had to do very little to the story you sent in. It was very, clean copy, as they say in the industry. So I can see that you could do that very well. So what we're going to do, unless you have anything else, we're going to open up for questions, and whoever asked this is completely subjective, and I apologize. Whoever asked the most interesting or original question will get a copy of a book, and a couple of runner-ups will receive a little merch here. So if anybody has any questions, raise your hand. Yes, sir.
So you talk a lot about the old arcades and places you used to hang out.
Yeah.
Other than the games, is there anything particularly memorable about one of the arcades? The layout, the food, the people, the location, anything that really sticks in your mind?
Oh, absolutely. So my two primary arcades were the Land of Oz arcade at the Northeast Mall in Hurst, Texas, which was a suburb of Fort Worth. And I just remember, so not only did they have this amazing arcade, they also had a movie theater with an arcade. And I remember, playing Time Pilot and then going to Pietro's Pizza to get a slice and then going to Orange Julius. It was just, you could spend the whole afternoon at the mall and just even go to Musicland and buy a ColecoVision game. I mean, it was just incredible. Malibu Grand Prix was amazing because it would just be rock and music, and it was still at the time when it was slightly seedy, arcade. It kind of toted the line between family friendly and slightly seedy because you could drink and smoke and everything, and they had rock and music, and they had pool tables and a snack bar, and my brother and I would go to Malibu Grand Prix every Sunday night, and other times too, but Sunday night was our thing. We would go for 5 or 6 hours. He might have $1, I might have 50 cents, but we would stay for hours. We were pinball wizards. We would Dolly Parton pinball machine and Hot Hand. We both mastered those pinball machines where you could win multiple games with one quarter. So we would tally up, 7, 8, 9, 10 games, and then we would sell those for 2 for a quarter to people so we could play video games, because video games would take your quarter in just sometimes literally a few seconds, if you're playing a really hard game, or a minute or two. Whereas pinball, we got so good at playing pinball, and like I said, we would look for credits, we would look for tokens, and back in the day, a lot of people would reserve the game when they're in line. The person playing it would put a quarter on the marquee or on the top. Every once in a while, we would find a token left on the top or behind the machine.
Not while they're still there.
Yeah, no, right. Just randomly. We would just walk around literally looking for tokens. And we got to the point where we kind of fudged it a little bit. We would, if we thought a game did us wrong, like a ball got stuck, we would go tell them that the ball got stuck and get a token. Now that was above board. But then we started if we just felt the game was unfair, we would go tell them, okay, this game, blah, 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 and they would give us a token. And we thought, no skin off their back, it's just a token, we don't have any money anyway. So I guess we sort of justified it in our minds. But we were teenagers, we were just, goofy kids. Yeah, I guess so. But
I won't tell.
Yeah, but just great memories of hanging out in the arcades. They were sort of our speakeasies for teens in the 80s, it was just a lot of fun. And I'll never forget, there are a few defining moments, like in 1976, discovering Breakout. And that was sort of like, wow, this is Pong by yourself, and you're knocking bricks out instead of just, batting the ball back and forth. So that game made me sort of decide that I might like video games even more than pinball. And then, then it just went on from there to Asteroids, Defender, Pac-Man. And real quick, I went to junior high school, what mostly people call middle school now. It was about 1.5 miles from my house, and I would ride my bike to school every day. Well, I would get up early to go to Quickway, this little convenience store around the corner, and this was before anybody cared about truancy or any of that kind of stuff back in the wild and woolly 80s. And so before school, I would play Asteroids, Pac-Man, and Phoenix. They had those games, and then after school, I would go by and play after basketball practice. And I got so good at Asteroids, I figured out this trick where if you fly straight up the screen and leave one slow-moving rock, you could just leave that rock and you could shoot flying saucers. And the little ones were worth 1,000, so you could pretty quickly rack up 10,000 to get an extra ship. So I got so good at that game, one night at Quickway, I was there 4.5 hours. This was before I even knew marathon gaming was a thing. I didn't know anything about Twin Galaxies or any kind of tournaments or anything. And I was just sitting there for 4.5 hours playing Asteroids, and there were ships lined up like trees across the top of the screen. And they finally kicked me out because they were closing. But that was memorable. And then I started doing the same thing I would do with pinball. I would play Asteroids. I'd go to an arcade with 1 or 2 quarters or find a token if I didn't have any money and play Asteroids, and I would line up all these ships, and then I would sell those for maybe a couple of bucks because people would see that there were tons of ships on there. So then that would give me money to play other pinball machines or other video games and stuff. So got a lot of great memories from the arcades. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm curious. So I'm 42, like closet gamer for a while in my life, kind of just now embracing it. Right? I think a lot of us got a lot of crap for it when we were younger. So at this point, like I'm totally all in. I'm searching out everything I can find, learning about the history, learning about this and that, the things that I missed. And you go on YouTube and you see all these, it's like a 15-minute video on one specific subject, 15-minute video on another specific subject. So, and it's great, but I feel like kind of jumping around, right?
It's a rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah, so exactly, it's a rabbit hole. And so I'm wondering, you've done a lot of research writing these books. What would you suggest for somebody who wants to build like a solid foundation of like the history of it, kind of from the bottom up?
He says to buy my books. No. Well, a good starting point is Phoenix, written by Leonard Herman. He's known as the godfather of video game history. He's here with a booth, and he wrote the definitive and first serious book on video games. Back in 1994, there were no serious video game history books that were comprehensive. And his books, his book, Phoenix, is the perfect companion to my books because my books cover each game cartridge, each game. His books cover each console. So every chapter is about a console, and it's a very comprehensive. And so that's a good starting point. And
You just carry that around with you?
yeah. Did you get the color or the black and white? Oh, nice. Yeah.
I need that hardcover.
Right. So if you're, yeah, I've got the first edition. As a matter of fact, Leonard Herman recently told me. So he published the first edition of Phoenix way back in 1994, and he could not find a publisher because back then publishers, they're like, what, a video game book? That was just almost unheard of back then. The only things you could find were just little kids guides or just maybe tip and trick books, those little paperbacks, and there were a few other things, but there was an Atari book, but not much at all. And publishers just didn't know what to make of a comprehensive video game history book. So he could not find a publisher. So he self-published it, and I found an ad in, I think, Electronic Games Magazine or something, but he told me I was the 4th person to buy his original Phoenix book, which I thought was
really cool.
Yeah, so I discovered video game fandom in 1990 and 91 around that time with the 2600 connection. That was the first video game fanzine in 1990. And then the digital press fanzine started in 1991, and you can still find those online if you just Google. That's another good starting point for video game history. Look up the 2600 Connection and the digital press fanzine. Those are two excellent, well-written fanzines, written from a lot of different perspectives. There's a lot of history there. And so anyway, yeah, Phoenix and those, and of course, my books. And Kelsey's channel.
Oh, that's not wide breadth. That's very narrow.
It's narrow, but it's still very
narrow
fascinating. But yeah, if you want a broad approach, you've got comprehensive game guides, you've got Phoenix, and you've got these interesting fanzines. So anybody else?
I also like
Yes.
oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I also like if you go to like racketboy.com, there's just kind of like a general, especially if you're getting into the collecting part of it too. They have just a general 4 paragraphs for every console that's kind of like here's the things that people liked and didn't like about this thing, here's what made it interesting, here's like 5 games you should play.
Right, yeah, Racket Boy is a good site.
Yeah, so it's a good site for that, especially if it's something you hadn't like really heard of much. You're like, what's a Vectrex? What's the Bally Astrocade? You know, like it'll give you a little bit of context for that.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead. Next one. Next
Okay,
person.
he was first. So. We'll try to do rapid fire. Yeah.
You're from the older generation, you're from the younger generation. I have a question. I want to know, I mean, you skew more towards retro stuff, but what game of the current generation impresses you the most? And conversely, what old, I mean, I'm talking old, like Atari, maybe, around then, fascinates you the most?
Well, I consider modern PS2 to the present. My favorite game from the modern era is Maximo Ghost to Glory. Absolutely love that game. I'm a big fan of the third-person 3D hack and slash. I love God of War. I love both Maximo games. I even like the lame Conan game on the 360. You know, so that kind of stuff. The Ninja Gaiden remake that's just brutal, hardcore, and
So you're talking about stuff that it's actually almost, it's like a spiritual successor to.
yeah, it's kind of retro in that sense. Yeah. Okay, Spider-Man for PS4, I spent a lot of time with. I beat Mario Odyssey, that was a lot of fun. Wind Waker, again, those are kind of retro-inspired at least. But yeah, that kind of stuff.
I don't have a like definitive answer to this, but the one that came to mind for me is the Chuck Norris game on the Atari 2600.
Oh, that's great.
And I'll tell you why. That game, as far as I can tell, invented like the RPG encounter mechanic. So you're walking along this path in this game as Chuck Norris, and you get into random encounters.
Yeah.
And it changes the screen, and then you have an enemy that comes on screen, and you kick them or whatever.
It's also an early beat 'em up.
What's that?
It's also an early beat 'em up.
Yeah, but it's like the random encounter system on the Atari 2600. What's
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good
Yeah.
stuff. Okay, anybody else? You and the glasses right here behind the guy in the glasses. Yeah, sorry.
One of the most interesting parts to me about video game history is that it's very much in what's considered living memory. When you're doing your research or when you're studying topics, do you ever feel a sense of urgency? In a sense, it's kind of macabre, right? That most of the stuff is.
Well, I know people that interview a lot of developers right now just for that, because a lot of them are getting into their 60s, and the very early guys are getting well into their 60s, and you know, you hear about these rock stars dying in their 60s, and yeah, there is a little bit of sense of urgency, and I know that for a fact. A couple of guys I talked to that interview developers, they've said that exact thing.
Yeah, I mean, I describe what we do at the foundation as stopping the bleeding. Like it's, we're racing against the clock here, and we're not going to finish it. Like we can't fix everything because people are
Right.
dying.
And you in the black here on the front.
Okay, so just a silly question. If your book was a game, do you consider it a retro game, or a modern game?
I would consider it a modern game with a retro slant, because it's like the Super Nintendo books, you know, very modern production, but it's very retro. So that's kind of an odd question, but
Yeah, no, I like
yeah.
it because I don't know how much like encyclopedias of stuff like this existed. I feel like I mean, maybe it's not like a modern thing, but this isn't the only book to do an encyclopedia of like a specific thing,
Yeah.
right? But I see that a lot more nowadays. Like you'll see these books that are things like the history of the NFL in 100 objects, or like
Yeah.
it's not quite the same thing, but you have sort of these like narrow focused but hardcover. We're going to try to cover everything.
Well, the publishing industry has changed so much that publishers want to publish something super nice that you can't replicate on the screen.
Yeah.
They want something heavy, something with lots of color, something that, you know, that will last a lifetime, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, who's next? You.
So my question is kind of like what his was about the games for you folks and everything. You know what yours is for the home consoles, but what my question is what arcade machine was like you just saw your first Trans Am?
Breakout. It was Breakout, because Pong and Midway's Gunfight, that kind of reminded me of electromechanical stuff. And Pinball, it just kind of tied in, but Breakout seemed different somehow. You know, it was like a monolith from 2001. And over here, yes.
My question is,
Yeah, go ahead.
my question is
developer, and I'm developing JRPG. And I've been journaling like details about the development. And
I love you.
Yeah.
I'm married. I love you.
But so I've also inserted bits and pieces of my personal life and milestones I've hit, and getting engaged and getting married. But then unfortunately, as with all development goes, we take multi-year breaks, and I've been doing this for a few years now. And how do you handle material that comes to you from like developers to write about, where they are talking about something 1 year, and then all of a sudden there's like a 2-year gap, and then you need material from then to the present?
No, that's part of the story. That's
So do you like keep it, or do you
Yeah.
toss out everything?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because that's all part of the story. And video games grow and are shaped over, sometimes over the course of like 10 years. And that's part of what makes the story interesting. Is like, hey, you had to like throw some stuff out and start over, and there was this 2-year gap in here. You could write a really fascinating, if I was writing a book on your game or doing a video on your game or something like that.
Okay, you on the far right. Yes, sir.
You just talk about the magazine when you go into a bookstore. Why come the big three, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, done away with theirs? I mean, it's so much.
There's just no video game magazines anymore. In the UK, there's still some, but it's just, yeah. And there's Old School Gamer magazine, yeah, which I write for.
And you will figure that since Xbox, I mean, it's so many games come out. Why
It's just a changing. Everybody just looks online. It's a sad fact. People want free information, even if it's poorly written. They just want free information.
And you can't even
Right.
log in and log your own information as far as you looking up games like Nintendo. You can't go back and look for it.
Sadly, sad but true. Yeah, people, for whatever reason, people will take poor content for free over paying for good content. Anybody else? Yes.
What's been the most surprising thing for you from going from the pen and paper medium to going into like YouTube and
The most surprising thing, well, I'll tell you what, doing YouTube, the most surprising thing was how filming a YouTube video feels like public speaking. I used to be horrible and nervous about public speaking. I was terrified, but doing YouTube has actually helped me sort of chill and just talk naturally. That was surprising to me, because it's just me and my son in a room and a camera, or maybe me and my podcasting partner before, and that's been a surprise that YouTube feels like public speaking, and to me at least, in some strange way. And you?
Yeah, just a quick question. So in your research, have you come across, you thought you know everything about a game or a subject and kind of caught your eye, you didn't know about the development or the release?
I wrote a book called The 100 Greatest Console Video Games, right here, 77 to 87. And so I grew up with that era, and all my two best friends had a Fairchild Channel F, Odyssey 2, on and on and on. I had tons of friends with tons of consoles, played all their games, and I discovered there was a game for the Odyssey 2 called Killer Bees. It's like no other game ever published before or since. It's absolutely phenomenal. That shocked me, what a cool, interesting concept that was, and I was surprised nobody's done a game like that before or since, and it made the cut because it was just fast. It's a great, quick action game. And that's been a surprise. I mean, just some of these hidden gems, games, and that. Yeah, I had.
I didn't know anything about this about Contra or something.
Yeah, before I started. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for me in my research, there's almost always something surprising, especially if you get interviews with people. A fun one that some of you guys might not know is that Animal Crossing, the original Animal Crossing, started off as a Diablo clone. Yeah, it was going to be a Diablo game with like animals.
Well, that went far afield.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot more to it than that, but that was the one thing that made me be like, what?
Yeah, so we're surprised along the way. I remember being surprised that the 7800 was test marketed in '84, and everybody thinks, okay, it only came out in '86, but it was actually briefly test marketed in '84, and I learned that along the way. We're still, both of us. We're still learning as we go. We learn new stuff all the time, And speaking of that, as soon as I hit 1,000 subscribers, as I mentioned earlier, I've got this horrible story to tell that just was embarrassing, and it cost me a ton of money. That's one of the gaps in my knowledge is from that. So if anybody wants to sub to Brett Weiss, I'd appreciate it. Kelsey Lewin, she's on YouTube, obviously, and if you want to subscribe to her as well, that would be amazing. So who should we award a book to? What question did really stick out to you?
I don't know. This was your idea.
Okay, so everybody that asked a question, here you go. So in 1998, the last Sega Genesis game was published, and it was an arcade classic, pitch perfect port. Does anybody that asked a question know what title that is? Yes, sir. Not Outrun. Frogger, you are the winner. Ding, ding, ding,
Yeah,
ding.
that's great.
These are $50. I do have them for sale here. I've got a booth out.
I'll
Kelsey's
sign
got-
them for you.
Yeah, I'll autograph them for you. Kelsey has.
Of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want volume 2, volume 1, or the 100 greatest? Okay, and Kelsey, she'll be happy to sign the 3. And 2 runners up.
Who wants them?
Who can use these items?
All right.
Okay, take the hat. And the question about the book, retro, yeah, you asked whoever asked about, are these, how did he phrase it?
If your book was a game, would it be a retro game?
A retro or modern game? That was
Yeah.
the most original
Yeah.
question, so you get that one.
All right.
All right, guys.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for showing up. I really appreciate it.
You can find me in the museum basically all show. So if you have more questions,
And you've got a couple more panels.
I do.
Yeah. So find us in the vendors room.